Carl Jung was asked one question that made priests furious. Is God real? And Jung would say, I do not believe in God, I know. People were confused. Priests were angry. They said, how can you know? And Jung smiled and refused to explain. For his entire life he refused, until 3 days before his death, when he finally revealed what he discovered about God. And it changed everything. So what did Jung discover? And why did he hide it his entire life? Let me show you. For 80 years, Carl Jung kept one secret about God. He would hint at it in lectures, in books, in private conversations, but he would never fully explain. People begged him, students, colleagues, even priests who wanted to understand. They would ask, you say you know God, not believe, but know. How is that possible? And Jung would say, if I tell you how, you will turn it into a belief, and belief is exactly what I am warning you against. This frustrated everyone, because they wanted the answer, the formula, the method. But Jung knew if he gave them the answer, they would memorize it, repeat it, teach it, and it would become another religion, another church, another set of rules, and the truth would be lost. Jung said, the moment you tell someone where God is, they stop looking. They think they know, but they do not know. They believe, and belief is the death of knowing. So Jung stayed silent for decades. He let people struggle, search, suffer, because he knew only through struggle would they find it, not through being told. But here is what Jung did not expect. As he approached death, as his body began to fail, something changed. He started seeing things, visions, dreams, things he had never seen before. And in those visions, God appeared, not as a concept, not as a belief, but as presence, real, undeniable, overwhelming. And Jung realized he had been protecting people from something, but now he needed to warn them before it was too late. Because what he saw in those final days terrified him. Not God, but what happens to people who never meet God, who live their entire lives believing, but never knowing. And 3 days before his death, Jung finally spoke. He told his nurse, I need to tell them before I go where God is, because if they do not find him, they will waste their entire lives searching in the wrong place. So what did Jung finally say? What did he see that made him break his silence? So where did Jung find God? He told his nurse, God is not where they are looking. She asked, where are they looking? Jung said, outside, in churches, in books, in priests, in heaven. They think God is out there somewhere, and if they pray enough, follow the rules enough, he will appear. Jung paused and said, but he will not, because he is not there. He never was. The nurse was shocked. She asked, then where is he? And Jung said one word, within. Not as a metaphor, not as poetry, but as fact. Jung said, God lives in the unconscious, in the deepest part of your mind, the part you cannot see, cannot control, cannot access through thinking. And here is what Jung discovered. Most people never go there. They live their entire lives in the conscious mind, thinking, planning, believing, but never descending into the unconscious, where God waits. Jung said, the unconscious is not just memories, not just dreams. It is the doorway to something infinite, something eternal, something most people call God. But here is the problem. To reach God, you must go through the shadow, through your darkness, through everything you rejected, everything you hid, everything you are ashamed of.
And most people will not do that. They want God without the journey. They want heaven without facing hell. But Jung discovered it does not work that way. He said, you cannot find God by being good, by praying, by believing. You find God by going into the depths, into your own darkness, and there, in the deepest place, you will meet Him. This is why churches do not teach this, because it is dangerous, unpredictable, uncontrollable. Churches want obedience, belief, rules. But Jung discovered God does not care about rules. God cares about truth, and truth requires dissent. Jung said, I met God in my darkest moment in 1913, when I descended into what I thought was madness. I saw things, visions, demons, chaos, and I thought I was losing my mind. But He was not. He was going deeper, past the conscious, past the ego, into the unconscious, and there, at the very bottom, He found God. Not as a person, not as a being, but as presence, infinite, eternal, knowing. And Jung said, in that moment I did not believe, I knew, because I was standing in the presence of something that was more real than anything I had ever known. But here is what terrified Jung. Most people will never go that deep. They will stay on the surface, in churches, in beliefs, in comfort, and they will die, never knowing what was waiting in the depths.
So what did Jung see in the depths? What was waiting that he called God? Jung described it in his private journal. He wrote, I was in a place that has no name, no light, no form, just infinite space, and I was not alone. There was a presence. Jung could not see it, could not touch it, but he could feel it, watching, knowing, aware. He wrote, it knew everything about me, about my life, about every thought, every sin, every lie, everything I had hidden, even from myself, and I was terrified because I thought it would judge me. But it did not. Jung wrote, the presence did not judge, it did not condemn, it just was. And in its presence I realized this is what people call God. Not a person, not a king, not a father, but pure awareness, pure knowing, infinite, eternal, holding everything. And here is what Jung discovered. God is not separate from you. God is the space in which you exist, the awareness that witnesses your life, the consciousness that knows you are alive. Jung said, people pray to God as if He is far away, but He is not. He is closer than your breath, closer than your thoughts. He is the awareness behind everything. But here is the problem. Most people never meet this awareness because they are too busy thinking, believing, performing, playing the role of who they think they should be. And the awareness cannot be found through performance. It can only be found through stillness, through dissent, through letting go of everything. Jung said, I had to lose myself to find God. I had to let go of Carl Jung, the psychologist, the identity, the ego, all of it. And when I finally let go and fell into the void, I found Him, waiting in the silence. And this is what Jung meant when he said, I do not believe, I know. Because belief is second-hand. Someone told you, you accepted it, you repeated it, but you never experienced it. Jung experienced it. He met God, not in a church, not through prayer, but by descending into his own unconscious and standing in the presence of infinite awareness. But Jung knew if he told people this, they would not understand,
They would think it was mysticism or madness or blasphemy. So he stayed quiet until his final days, when he realized people needed to know, not because it would save them, but because, without knowing, they would die still searching in all the wrong places. Jung said, "Churches teach people to look up, to heaven, to the sky, but God is not up. God is down, in the depths, in the unconscious, in the place most people are too afraid to go. And if you never go there, you will never meet him. You will believe your entire life, but you will never know. And death will come, and you will realize too late that he was always there, waiting in the one place you refused to look, inside."
So how do you descend into the depths? How do you meet God the way Jung did? Jung gave one method, the only method that works. He called it active imagination, but it is not what you think. It is not meditation, not prayer, not visualization. It is surrender. Jung said, "You cannot force your way into the unconscious. You cannot think your way there. You can only let go and fall." This terrified people, because letting go feels like dying, and it is. Jung said, to meet God, the ego must die, not physically, but psychologically. You must stop being who you think you are and become nothing. Here is how Jung did it. Step 1. Sit in silence. No distractions, no music, no thoughts to hold on to, just emptiness. Jung said most people cannot sit for 5 minutes in true silence because the ego panics. It needs noise, it needs control. But if you can sit and not run, something shifts. Step 2. Let the images come. Jung said, when you sit in silence, the unconscious begins to speak, not in words, but in images, symbols, visions, and you must let them come without judging, without controlling, just witnessing. This is where most people fail, because the images are disturbing, dark, violent, sexual, terrifying, and the ego wants to shut them down. But Jung said, do not shut them down. These are not enemies, they are messengers from the unconscious, showing you what you have been hiding. Step 3. Descend deeper. Jung said, if you can stay with the images without running, you will go deeper, past the personal unconscious, past your memories, past your trauma, into the collective unconscious, where God lives. And here is what Jung warned. You cannot do this casually. You cannot do this for fun. Because once you start descending, things will come up. Memories you buried, pain you avoided, darkness you denied. And if you are not ready, it will overwhelm you. Jung said, I descended, and I nearly did not come back. For months I thought I was going mad. I saw demons, I heard voices, I felt like I was dissolving. And if I had not had the strength to keep going, I would have been lost. But he kept going, and at the bottom he found God, not as a reward, but as what was always there, waiting. Jung said, God does not appear when you are ready. God appears when you finally stop. Stop performing, stop defending, stop being. And in that stopping, in that surrender, he is there, not as something new, but as what always was.
But here is the tragedy. Most people will never do this. They will pray, they will go to church, they will believe, but they will never descend. Because descent requires courage, and most people do not have it. They would rather believe in God than meet Him, because belief is safe, knowing is not. Jung said, "The path to God is through the shadow, through your darkness, through everything you are afraid of, and most people will choose comfort over truth, safety over God, and they will die still believing but never knowing."
So what happens if you never descend? If you never meet God the way Jung did? Jung saw this in his patients every day. People who prayed, who believed, who followed every rule, but felt nothing. Jung said, "They come to me and they say, 'I believe in God. I go to church. I pray, but I feel empty.' Why?" And Jung would say, "Because you are believing in someone else's God, not your own. You are repeating words, following rituals, but you have never met Him. And without meeting Him, it is just performance." And here is what Jung discovered. People who never meet God live half-lives. They go through the motions, they follow the script, but inside they are hollow. Jung said they are waiting for God to appear, to save them, to give them meaning, but He will not, because He is not coming from outside. He is already inside, waiting for them to finally look. But they do not look, because looking requires descent, and descent is terrifying. So they stay on the surface, in safety, in belief, in churches, and they die still waiting. Jung said, "I have seen people on their deathbeds still praying, still waiting for God to come, and He does not, because they spent their entire lives looking in the wrong direction." And here is the tragedy. God was always there, in the depths, in the unconscious, in the silence, but they were too afraid to go there, too afraid to let go, too afraid to face the darkness, and so they missed Him completely. Jung said, "The saddest thing is not that people do not believe in God, it is that they believe but never meet Him. They worship an idea, a concept, a story, but they never experience the presence. And when death comes, they realize, too late, that their entire life was spent believing in something they never actually knew." Jung wrote in his journal, "I met a man once, deeply religious. He prayed every day, read the Bible, went to church, and on his deathbed he looked at me and said, 'I wasted my life. I believed, but I never knew, and now it is too late.'" This broke Jung, because he saw this was not rare, this was most people, living their entire lives in belief, but never in knowing. And Jung realized he had to warn them before it was too late that God is not in churches. God is in the depths, and if you never descend, you will die still searching in all the wrong places. Jung said, "Do not wait for death to force the descent. Do it now, while you are alive, while you still have time. Go into the depths, face the darkness, and meet God. Because if you do not, you will spend your entire life believing, but never knowing. And that," Jung said, "is the greatest tragedy of all." 3 days before Jung died, he gave one final message to his nurse. She sat beside him, and Jung said,
I need you to tell them something about God." She waited, and Jung said, "Tell them God is not angry. He is not judging. He is not waiting for them to be perfect. He is just waiting for them to stop running and finally come home." The nurse asked, "Where is home?" Jung smiled and said, "The unconscious, the depths, the place they have been avoiding their entire lives. That is where he is. That is where he has always been, waiting." And then Jung said something that she never forgot. He said, "Most people think they will meet God after death in heaven, but that is not true. If you do not meet him in life, you will not meet him in death, because God is not a place. He is awareness, and if you never became aware in life, death will not change that." This terrified her. She asked, "So what happens to people who never meet him?" Jung said, "They dissolve, not into nothing, but into unconsciousness. They return to the depths, but without ever knowing what they were, what they are, and that is the real death, not the body, but never waking up." And then Jung said, "But it does not have to be that way. Anyone can meet God, right now, today. They just have to stop performing, stop believing, stop searching outside, and go in." The nurse asked, "How do they start?" Jung said, "Sit in silence. Let the darkness come. Do not run. Do not pray. Do not ask for anything. Just be in the silence. And eventually, if you can stay, you will feel it, the presence, the awareness, the thing that has been watching you your entire life. That is God. And once you feel it, you will not need to believe anymore, because you will know." Jung closed his eyes and said, "Tell them, do not waste their lives searching in churches, in books, in heaven. God is not there. He is in the one place they refuse to look, inside, in the depths, in the darkness, where they are most afraid to go. That is where he waits." 3 days later, Jung died. But before he went, he whispered one last thing. "I am going to meet him again, not in heaven, but in the infinite, where I came from, where we all came from, and where we all return." And then he smiled and let go, and became what he had always been, not Carl Jung, but the awareness that was dreaming Carl Jung, and that awareness, Jung knew, was God. Let's understand the conclusion. So here is what Carl Jung discovered about God. God is not in churches. God is not in heaven. God is not waiting for you to be good enough. He is waiting in the depths, in the unconscious, in the place you are most afraid to go. And if you never go there, you will spend your entire life believing, but never knowing. Jung said, "I do not believe in God. I know." Not because he was special, not because he was chosen, but because he did what most people will not do. He descended into the darkness, into the unconscious, into the depths of himself. And there he met God, not as a person, not as a father, not as a king, but as presence, infinite awareness, eternal knowing, the thing that witnesses everything. And Jung realized God was never outside. God was always within, waiting for him to stop searching and finally look. And now you know what Jung discovered, what he kept hidden his entire life, until 3 days before his death, when he finally revealed where God is and how to meet him. The question is, will you? Will you stop going to churches? Stop praying to the sky? Stop waiting for God to come to you? And finally go to him, into the depths, into the silence, into the darkness, where he waits. Jung spent his entire life trying to tell people God is not where you think. He is not who you were taught. He is the awareness behind everything, the presence in the silence, the knowing in the depths. And you can meet him right now, today, if you are brave enough to descend. If this video showed you something, if you felt it, even for a moment, that maybe God is not where you were looking, subscribe to SYC Soul, because the journey into the depths continues. Hit the like button if you are ready to stop believing and start knowing. Share this video with someone who is searching, who is praying, who needs to know God is not out there, He is within. And leave one word in the comments: knowing, descending, within, presence, depths, whatever feels true. Your word matters because it marks the moment when you stopped searching outside and started looking within. This is SYC Soul. Jung's final message about God was simple. Stop believing, start descending, and meet Him. Not after death, but now, while you are alive, while you still have time to go into the depths and stand in the presence of infinite awareness, of eternal knowing, of God. Jung did not believe, he knew, because he met Him, and you can too. The question is, will you keep searching in churches, or will you finally go within, into the silence, into the darkness, into the depths, where God has always been, waiting for you to finally come home? The choice is yours, and it starts now. Not by praying, not by believing, but by sitting in silence and descending into the one place you have been avoiding your entire life, the depths, where God waits. Go now and meet Him.
What if God is not perfect? Just sit with that question for one moment. Everything inside you is probably resisting it right now, because if God is not perfect, everything collapses. Morality disappears. Creation becomes meaningless. Suffering has no purpose. Hope has no foundation. The Church taught you that God's perfection was the foundation of everything you believe. But Carl Jung, after decades of studying the human soul across every culture and every century, asked this same dangerous question. And what he discovered did not destroy the concept of God. It revealed something so profound, so personally liberating, so completely different from the cold, flawless God the Church presented, that it changes everything about how you understand God's relationship with you. So what did Jung actually discover? Why does God's perfection matter personally to you? And what does the real answer actually mean for your life? Let me show you. Notice what happened when you heard that question. Something tightened inside you immediately, because this is not an ordinary theological question. This is the question that threatens everything simultaneously. If God is not perfect, His commands become questionable, His judgment becomes unreliable, His promises become uncertain, His entire nature becomes unstable, and you built your entire life on that stability. The church understood this psychological dynamic perfectly, and it used it deliberately. By making God's perfection the foundation of everything, it made questioning God psychologically impossible. Question God's perfection, and you risk losing everything: your faith, your community, your eternal security. So nobody questioned it for centuries. Entire populations of human beings accepting one specific definition of God's perfection without ever examining where that definition actually came from. Jung noticed this pattern immediately. He called it theological intimidation, using the most profound human need for stability and security to prevent genuine, honest inquiry into God's actual nature. But Jung asked one devastating question: what if the Church's definition of perfect and God's actual nature are not the same thing at all? So where did the Church's definition of God's perfection actually come from? Here is what your Church never told you. The word perfect does not appear in original scripture the way you were taught. The Hebrew word used most frequently is tamim. It does not mean flawless. It does not mean without error or imperfection. It means complete, whole, nothing missing. Enormous difference. When the original writers described God as tamim, they were not describing a cold, mathematical flawlessness. They were describing something so vast, so complete, so utterly whole that nothing exists outside of it. So how did complete and whole become cold and flawless? Greek philosophy happened. When early church fathers encountered Greek philosophical tradition, they imported the Greek concept of perfection, the Platonic ideal, the unchanging, flawless absolute, and they applied it directly onto the Hebrew God. Jung studied this historical collision carefully, and he found something deeply significant. The Greek perfect God is distant, unchanging, untouchable, completely unaffected by human suffering. The Hebrew complete God is intimate, present, deeply affected by human experience. These are not the same God. The Church gave you the Greek version, but your soul was always searching for the Hebrew one. So what does this distinction actually mean for how you understand God? Think about what this actually means for you personally. The Greek perfect God cannot be moved by your suffering, cannot be affected by your pain, cannot genuinely respond to your prayers, because a flawless, unchanging absolute cannot be touched by anything imperfect, including you. This is the God the Church gave you, distant, untouchable, requiring your perfection before genuine relationship becomes possible. But the Hebrew complete God is something entirely different, a God so vast and whole that your suffering genuinely matters, your doubt genuinely registers, your pain genuinely moves something divine. Not because God is weak, but because God is complete enough to contain your imperfection without being threatened by it. Jung found this distinction psychologically revolutionary because it changes the entire emotional texture of relationship with God. The Greek God requires your perfection before accepting you. The Hebrew God is complete enough to accept your imperfection entirely. You were never meant to approach God as a flawed human approaching a flawless machine. You were meant to approach wholeness itself, as a beloved and imperfect part of it. So what did Jung discover about how God actually relates to human imperfection? Stay with me right here, because what Jung discovered about God and human imperfection will change everything about how you approach God today. Jung studied the Bible not as a believer or atheist, but as a psychologist following evidence honestly. And what he found throughout Scripture consistently and powerfully was a God who chose imperfect people, deliberately, consistently, without exception. Not despite their imperfection, through it. Abraham lied repeatedly. Moses had a violent temper. David committed adultery and murder. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Paul persecuted Christians before becoming one. These were not minor flaws quickly corrected. These were profound human failures, moral collapses, devastating betrayals. And God chose every single one of them anyway. Jung found this pattern psychologically extraordinary because it suggests something the Church never emphasized clearly. God's completeness is not threatened by human imperfection. It is expressed through it. A God who only worked through perfect people would have nobody to work through. The entire biblical narrative is God consistently choosing broken human beings and doing extraordinary things through their very brokenness. So, what does this mean about your own imperfection? Think about how you have approached God your entire life. Apologizing constantly, promising to do better, hiding your worst parts, performing your best parts, desperately trying to present a version of yourself worthy of a perfect God's attention. Jung watched this exhausting pattern in thousands of people, and he said something that should stop you completely. You were never meant to become perfect before approaching God. The biblical evidence is overwhelming. God consistently chose the most broken available human beings, not the most qualified, not the most morally impressive, not the most religiously devoted, the most honest about their brokenness. David was chosen not despite his failures, but because of his radical honesty about them. The Psalms are not perfect theology. They are raw, desperate human emotion directed honestly toward God. That honesty, Jung discovered, was exactly what genuine relationship with God actually requires. Not your perfection, not your performance, not your carefully managed religious presentation. Your honest, broken, completely imperfect reality, brought directly to a God complete enough to hold all of it. You were never too broken for God. You were simply taught to believe you were. So what happens psychologically when you finally stop performing perfection for God? Do not go anywhere, because this is where everything changes. Jung documented this moment carefully across decades of clinical work. The moment a person stops performing perfection for God and brings their honest, broken reality instead, something extraordinary happens. The exhaustion stops first. That chronic spiritual tiredness of never being quite enough simply dissolves, because you are no longer carrying the impossible weight of presenting a perfect version of yourself to an infinitely perfect God. Then something else arrives. Jung called it genuine encounter. Not the carefully managed religious performance most people call prayer, but actual honest contact between a broken human soul and a God complete enough to receive it fully. People who experienced this in Jung's clinical work described it consistently, not as religious euphoria, not as emotional intensity, as profound relief. The feeling of finally being completely known and completely accepted simultaneously, not conditionally, not after improvement, not pending better performance. Right now, exactly as you are, every broken piece included. Jung said this experience transforms relationship with God fundamentally, because you cannot genuinely connect with a God you are constantly performing for. So what did Jung discover about why God actually created imperfection in the first place? Stay right here, because this is where Jung's discovery becomes truly extraordinary. Why would a complete God create an imperfect world? The Church gave you one answer. Sin entered, perfection was lost, now everything is broken and needs saving. But Jung studied creation narratives across every culture and every century, and he found something the Church consistently missed. Imperfection was never an accident. Think about this carefully. A completely static, perfect world has no movement, no growth, no discovery, no genuine relationship, no love. Because love requires choice. Choice requires genuine alternatives. Genuine alternatives require the real possibility of failure. Without imperfection, nothing real is possible. Jung called this the necessary tension of creation, the deliberate inclusion of incompleteness that makes genuine growth, genuine love, and genuine meaning possible. God did not create imperfection because something went wrong. God created imperfection because something extraordinary was intended. A creation capable of genuine growth, genuine choice, genuine love, none of which are possible in a static, flawless world. Your imperfection is not evidence that creation failed. It is evidence that something genuinely real was attempted. So, what does this mean about human suffering specifically?
Jung was honest about suffering. He never minimized it, never spiritualized it into comfortable theology, never told his patients their pain was secretly wonderful. He sat with it honestly. And after decades of documented clinical work, he arrived at one consistent finding. Suffering is not evidence that God abandoned you. It is evidence that you are genuinely alive inside a real creation. A creation where genuine growth is possible, where genuine love is possible, where genuine meaning is possible, none of which exist without genuine pain. Jung found something extraordinary in people who reached this understanding. Not that their suffering disappeared, not that pain suddenly felt wonderful, but that it stopped feeling like punishment. The difference between suffering as divine punishment and suffering as the inevitable cost of genuine life is the difference between a God who abandoned you and a God who trusted you enough to place you inside something real. Jung said the people who found genuine peace inside suffering were not the ones who suffered least. They were the ones who stopped interpreting suffering as evidence of God's absence and started recognizing it as evidence of God's profound trust in their capacity to grow. So what did Jung ultimately conclude about God's completeness?
Jung spent decades arriving at one conclusion. God is not perfect the way a machine is perfect. God is perfect the way an ocean is perfect. Think about that image carefully. An ocean is not flawless. It contains storms and stillness simultaneously, darkness and light simultaneously, destructive waves and life-sustaining depths simultaneously. Nobody looks at an ocean and calls it broken because it contains storms. The storm is not evidence of the ocean's failure. It is evidence of the ocean's extraordinary completeness. Jung said God's completeness works exactly this way, a completeness so vast it contains everything simultaneously, your perfection and your failure, your faith and your doubt, your holiness and your brokenness. Not tolerating these opposites reluctantly, containing them completely, purposefully, without being threatened by any of them. Jung called this the complexio oppositorum, the divine union of all opposites. Not a God diminished by containing darkness, but a God whose completeness is only fully understood when you stop demanding he look like a flawless machine and start recognizing him as the vast, complete ocean that contains everything you are, including the storm. So why did the Church never teach you this extraordinary truth?
Do not close this video yet, because this is the part that explains everything. Every suppressed question, every dismissed doubt, every moment you felt God was too distant, too demanding, too impossible to reach. This explains all of it. The Church needed God to be flawlessly perfect for one specific reason: control. A flawlessly perfect God creates an enormous, unbridgeable gap between God and humanity. And in that gap, the institution positions itself as the bridge, as the mediator, as the only reliable path across the impossible distance between your imperfection and God's flawless perfection. Without that gap, the institution loses its most valuable product: access to God. But a complete God, an ocean God who contains everything, including your imperfection, needs no bridge, no mediator, no institutional permission system, because there is no gap to cross. You are already inside the ocean, already contained within divine completeness, already held within something vast enough to include every broken piece of you simultaneously. Jung said this truth was not suppressed through malice, it was suppressed through institutional survival instinct. A God you can already reach is a God the institution cannot sell you access to. So what does this mean for your relationship with God right now?
Stay right here, because everything you have heard today leads to this moment. You do not need to become perfect before approaching God. You never did. Every prayer you postponed because you were not good enough, God was already present. Every moment you felt too broken for genuine relationship, God was already containing your brokenness completely. Every time you performed religious perfection desperately hoping God would finally accept you, God was already there, already complete enough to hold everything you were hiding. Jung said this realization changes prayer fundamentally. Stop approaching God as a flawed human desperately petitioning a flawless machine. Start approaching completeness itself as a beloved and imperfect part of it. Bring your anger honestly. Bring your doubt completely. Bring your failures without carefully managed presentation. Not because God tolerates these things reluctantly, because God is complete enough to receive them fully. Jung found people who began approaching God this way did not become less reverent, less devoted, less spiritually serious. They became genuinely free. Free from the exhausting performance of religious perfection, free to bring their whole, honest, broken self to a God complete enough to hold every single piece. So, what is the final truth Jung left us about God's perfection?
Here is what Carl Jung spent his entire life discovering. God is not perfect the way the church defined perfect: cold, flawless, distant, untouchable, requiring your impossible perfection before genuine relationship becomes possible. That God was never in the original scripture. That God was constructed by institutions that needed an unbridgeable gap between humanity and the divine. The real God, the Hebrew Tamim God, is something completely different, complete, whole, vast enough to contain everything simultaneously. Your faith and your doubt, your holiness and your failure, your strongest moments and your most devastating collapse. All of it contained, all of it held, none of it capable of threatening something so utterly complete. Jung found this truth consistently across decades of documented clinical work. The people who encountered this complete God did not become spiritually careless, did not abandon moral responsibility, did not use God's completeness as permission for destruction. They became genuinely free, free from performing, free from hiding, free from the exhausting, impossible task of becoming perfect enough for a flawless machine God. And in that freedom, they found something the Church's perfect God never once provided: genuine, intimate, unbreakable relationship with a God complete enough to love every broken piece of them simultaneously.
Here is what Jung actually recommended. 3 specific practices, documented, practical, starting today. Practice 1. Honest prayer. Stop presenting your best version to God. Start bringing your actual version, your anger, your doubt, your confusion, your failures. Not despite God's completeness, because of it. Write one completely honest prayer today. No performance, no careful presentation. Just raw, honest truth directed toward a God complete enough to receive it fully. Practice 2.
Reframe your imperfection daily. Every time you feel too broken for God, replace one thought. Not, I am too imperfect for God, but my imperfection is already contained within something complete. That single shift transforms your entire relationship with God gradually but permanently. Practice 3. Read the Psalms differently. Not as perfect theology, as raw, honest human souls bringing their complete broken reality directly to God. David's most desperate psalms were his most genuine moments with God. Let them give you permission to do the same. This is SYC Soul, where psychology meets the questions religion was afraid to ask. If this video changed something inside you, subscribe. New truth every single week. Now tell me honestly, drop one word below: performing, searching, or free.